As the famous U2 song once said, it is cut day, bloody cut day. What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Ravens Rundown. I'm your host, Joey Petersen. We're still about 4 hours away from approaching the final deadline for roster cuts, but the Ravens have made some moves, already cut 13 players in the last 24 hours or so. So I'm going to give a quick rundown here on Ravens Rundown of all the cuts that have been made, and of course, we'll be back later with a video today. And speaking of that, that's why you should hit the subscribe button, everybody. I'll be back here in probably 5 or 6 hours. We'll go over the whole 53-man roster, every cut that was made, every move that the Ravens made, get you all on updated. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss it. Stick by the channel, and we'll get in and start with today's video. The first cuts. The three are coming with the tight end position. First one's Mike Rigerman. Second one's Riley Sharp. Third one is Qadir Ismail. Now, this isn't very surprising. You kind of knew this was coming. I think Qadir was the only one that might have been, okay, maybe he has an outside shot. He'd had a really good camp. He really had. Tons of people from The Athletic, from the Baltimore Banner, were saying he's the biggest riser so far in this training camp. But you just knew that Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kolar, those are three guys that aren't going to be moved. Isaiah Likely, man, am I so excited about him. I've talked about him a lot this preseason. And unfortunately, these three guys just probably came into camp knowing, okay, we're fighting for an outside chance to make this roster. Qadir Ismail, though, is definitely a guy that was a popular name in camp, was definitely a guy that I talked about here and there just a little bit, but we all knew at the end of the day, probably wasn't going to make this roster. This is one of the most stacked tight end rooms in the entire NFL. Moving on to the offensive line, Tashawn Manning got cut, as well as Darrell Simpson. Tashawn Manning was a guy I literally had talked about yesterday on my cut candidates. I put Saleh as a cut candidate because I thought maybe Tashawn could make this roster. It ends up that I think the coaching staff, this organization, was just really happy with the way that Saleh had improved and had played in training camp in this preseason so far. I think Saleh offers you something when it comes to run defense that Tashawn doesn't. And I think that's what gave him the edge over Tashawn Manning. And honestly, guys, this is probably something I should have seen. Tashawn Manning was playing late into that preseason game. And guys, at the end of the day, if you're playing late into the preseason, there's a good chance you don't make this roster. Darrell Simpson, another name, and I think at the end of the day, it's going to be curious to see, okay, is this offensive line going to command 10 spots on this roster, or is it going to command 9? I think it commands 10. I don't know if there's enough depth, and Nick Samach's injury isn't it's not that bad. It's not that serious. It was an ankle sprain, but he was practicing yesterday. I think there's going to be 10 spots on this offensive line, but Tashawn Manning, Darrell Simpson, those are two guys that will not have one of those spots. So, do you think Tashawn Manning should have made the roster? Again, I know it's not easy to say when you don't get to see practice every day, you don't get to see the reps. But guys, still, let me know. I know you have opinions. I've got opinions. Let me know down there in the comment section. Type Y for yes and type in for no. Before we move on with the rest of our cuts, and we've got about, 8 more for you guys, I got to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Factor. Factor, guys, is the best place to go for the most nutritious and most delicious pre-made meals that you could find anywhere in the world. Factor, big shout out to them. Eating better is easy with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian approved, and ready to go in just 2 minutes. You'll have over 35 different options to choose from every week, including Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Also, there are more than 60 add-ons to help you stay fueled up and feeling good all day long. What are you waiting for? I'm going to talk a little bit about that roasted red pepper filet mignon. I talked about it on yesterday's video. I love it so much, I'm going to talk about it again today. Again, guys, I thought my dad was a good a steak guy. I thought my dad grilled a good steak until I tried the red pepper filet mignon by Factor. And my favorite thing about it is you don't just get the meat. You get everything around it. They make sure all major food groups are covered. They make sure you will be looking your best because you are eating the absolute best. So head over to factormeals.com/RavensChat50 and use code RavensChat50 to get 50% off. That's code RavensChat50 at factormeals.com/RavensChat50 to get 50% off. On to our next cut candidates. And guys, if you'll excuse me, I've got Jeff Zreback's Twitter pulled up. I got to just see it just in case he makes a move while I'm filming this video. So far, nothing though. We'll move on. Anthony Miller was cut, as well as Sean Ryan and as well as Russell Gage. Wide receiver room took some hits today. And with Anthony Miller and Russell Gage, those are two guys that I think at the end of the day just came into this team a little bit late. When it comes to Russell Gage's case, gets signed in early August, and then he's just battled some injuries, like 3 days after getting on the team. He came in a little too late, got injured a little bit too early, and really didn't get a chance to show, okay, coming off that ACL tear, coming off that injury in Tampa Bay, I'm still a good wide receiver. I do think Anthony Miller is one that kind of, I don't want to say surprised me, but Anthony Miller, there was great reports coming out about him throughout the entire training camp. It was a signing at the time really confused me because I was like, this is a name I haven't heard since I was like a junior in high school, honestly. But a lot of people were really high on him. He'd been performing well. You saw in that second preseason game against the Falcons, he was one of Josh Johnson's favorite targets, went to him 3 times in a row. But at the end of the day, I just think there's better wide receivers fighting for spots than Anthony Miller, than Sean Ryan, than Russell Gage, and they all got cut. Damarion Williams. And this isn't surprising. This was a guy that was on my cut candidates video yesterday. And if you look at last week, I think people were saying, okay, if Pepe Williams has a really good game on Saturday against the Packers, he might make this decision hard for Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh. Now, they weren't saying if he has a good game, he's definitely going to be on this roster. But reports were out that, okay, if he plays well, this might not be an easy decision. And unfortunately, guys, he just didn't. Not only did not play well, but you can tell that the Packers were actively targeting him, right? They were throwing at him. Didn't tackle well, didn't cover well, got absolutely mossed on a touchdown catch. Unfortunately, did not make the roster. Emory Jones, another quarterback that didn't make this roster. And when you're QB4 behind Devin Leary, you know you don't have a good shot to make it. I would have liked personally to see a little bit more Emory Jones in the preseason, right? I was done with Devin Leary after about a possession or two against the Packers. But at the end of the day, this should be nothing that surprises anybody. Chris Collier found his name on the chopping block, running back. And I'm not going to lie, he had some juice in this preseason. He really did. Keaton Mitchell, they reported today, is going to be on the PUP list for the Ravens. And so he won't be eligible to play for the first 4 weeks. But you got to kind of ask yourself, okay, everybody thinks this team is going to bring 4 running backs on, right? Are they, though? Do they need to do that? Will they do that? I'm not sure. I think it's going to, with Owen's right injury, it definitely complicates things. With only getting to put 2 guys on the IR, that definitely complicates things. Chris Collier, a guy who found himself on the chopping block. Another guy, Jack Browning, another late addition to this Ravens team. You're competing for a spot with Jordan Stout. You're not going to keep 2 punters on this roster. Jack Browning is a guy that we knew at the end of the day was not going to be a Baltimore Raven come the fall. And last one, Tramel Walthor, defensive tackle, formerly with the Georgia Bulldogs, is stacked up with a pretty good defensive line. I know that a lot of people are scared, nervous, have their questions about the way that this defensive line is going to perform this season. But at the end of the day, it's one of the best defensive lines in football. And Tramel Walthor he had a really tough climb up to the roster. So who do you guys think? You guys let me know. Who's the biggest surprise cut so far? I'd say Tashawn Manning, maybe Anthony Miller. I mean, it didn't really surprise me, but I know he's a guy that might have had a shot. But you guys let me know. Who is the biggest surprising cut for the Ravens? And just let me know down there in that comment section. Next up, I'm going to talk about my most notable free agent that is left, and that is wide receiver Noah Brown. Just got cut today by the Texans, and if you look at his stats from last season, he had a pretty good year. 33 receptions, 567 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And when you think of what we've been talking about through these last 2 weeks and kind of this whole offseason, is okay, we need a guy who can come in here and get you 500 or 600 yards. You don't need to sign a 1,000-yard receiver. The Ravens don't need that right now. There's just too much offensive power with Zay Flowers, with Mark Andrews, with Lamar Jackson, with Derrick Henry. You're not realistically going to get a guy that's going to come in here and get 1,000 yards. You do want a guy that you can pretty much guarantee and you can rely on to get you 500 or 600. I think Noah Brown could be that guy. I'm not saying I think that the Ravens sign him. I'm not saying that the Ravens pick him up. But I also know that Eric DeCosta, I'd be surprised if he just sits for the rest of the day and just makes cuts. Wouldn't be surprised if he makes a move. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Again, I will be back by the end of the day to give a full 53-man roster breakdown, have all the cuts ready for you. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you later.